Good afternoon. Thanks for joining today's media briefing. I'm Philip Sanfield from the Port of Los Angeles Communications team. It's my pleasure to once again introduce Executive Director Gene Seroka. Greetings, Gene.
Hello, Philip, and welcome everyone to our last media briefing of 2022. We appreciate you joining us later than usual today so we can accommodate our special guest from Singapore. Jeremy Nixon is the Chief Executive Officer of Ocean Network Express, also known as the ONE. As leader of a top global shipping line, he has a unique perspective on the supply chain, and we look forward to his insights in a few moments as to where we're headed in 2023. It should be a great discussion, and as always, we invite your questions as well.
Thank you, Gene. Let's start with cargo data. How were this past month's numbers?
Philip, the recent trend continues. November volume came in at 639,000 20-foot equivalent units, a year-on-year decrease of 21% and a 24% decline compared to our 5-year average. Container movement was light across the board. Imports landed at 307,000 TEUs, down 24% year-on-year. Exports, while increasing 9% to 90,000 TEUs, are still 34% lower than our 5-year average. And empties totaled 242,000 TEUs, 26% off last November. Why the continued slowdown? As I've outlined before, an early peak season and a shift to other ports due to West Coast labor talks have had big impacts. And now we're seeing a nationwide slowing of imports. In fact, U.S. imports for November are expected to fall 12% year-on-year as retailers ease factory orders. Also, exports out of China fell nearly 9% last month. That's the biggest drop since February of 2020, when COVID lockdowns there brought production to a crawl. Closer to home, we're seeing canceled or blank sailings. Los Angeles had 13 in November, and now we're forecasting 11 for the month of December. To give you some perspective, we haven't seen numbers like those since the start of the pandemic. So where do we stand as we close out 2022? It's clearly a weaker second half than many would have predicted. From August through November, cargo volume in Los Angeles is down 21% year-on-year. Yet all that said, we're still on track to finish 2022 just under 10 million TEUs, our second best performance ever, outpaced only by last year.
Thanks, Gene. What are your thoughts as we head into 2023?
Philip, we've got work to do moving forward. Here are 3 key areas I'm focused on in the near term. First, we've got to get this labor contract done. Both sides are working hard, and I remain optimistic that these very capable negotiators are going to get to an agreement together early next year. That's the certainty cargo owners are waiting for, so it can't happen fast enough. Second, we need to get out and work for every pound of freight. Just like we collaborated with our partners to clear the backlog, we need a united industry push to demonstrate why LA should be our customers' first choice. I've personally been on a whistle-stop tour crisscrossing the country during these past 6 weeks, and I will continue to do so, preferably with some key partners, in order to bring cargo back to Los Angeles. And lastly, as the cargo returns, and it will, we need to continue to up our game with better data, less wait times, and more efficiency. Every ship, every train, every truck move needs to be handled with the top-line service our customers expect and deserve. So, contract, cargo, commitment. Once we address all of that, we can move the needle.
Thanks for that overview, Gene. Now it's time for our featured interview. Would you please introduce today's guest?
My pleasure. Jeremy Nixon knows this business as well as anyone. In his long career, he's been the CEO of NYK Shipping Line, a vice president at Maersk, and he has now been the CEO of Ocean Network Express since it was founded back in 2017. Jeremy, good morning. We really appreciate your early wake up in Singapore to be here with us today.
Gene, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Jeremy, to start off, give us a snapshot profile of the O&E, the background of the company, and what your core focus is here in the United States.
Yeah, sure, Gene. Yes, as you rightfully said, I came on board as the CEO in 2017 when we were forming the company. So essentially, three legacy companies, K-Line, MOL, and NYK. We consolidated those down into a new brand. We put all the assets together and operated that as a new container shipping company with a particularly strong focus on the Trans-Pacific here in North America. And we're just going to come up to our 5th year anniversary in April next year. And it's been, I don't know where time goes, but it's been an amazing last 4 or 5 years. We're operating into the Los Angeles, San Pedro area, 9 services a week. Very, very much focused Trans-Pacific, but we do have an Asia-Europe all-water service coming through Panama. And we do have our Latin American services coming in up and down to the LA basin as well. We're doing the full range of services, full range coverage of all the major Asia load ports. And of course, as well as imports, we're doing a lot of exports as well, particularly further up into Northern California and up into the PNW. But LA is still an important export market, particularly for a lot of the reefer products as well. So yeah, we're fully focused on the job, and we're here and we're continuing to invest in our business. And very recently, we're just in the process now of taking over the 2 container terminals from our original parent companies, so YTI and also Trapac. And we should make some announcements very soon about us taking over the majority control of those assets as well.
Well, congratulations on the 5-year milestone and all the work that you're doing here with us. Coming off the boom of the last 2.5 years, we've seen a softer market recently. How do you see 2023 lining up, and what are you doing to prepare for next year?
Yeah, I do see clearly Chinese New Year is very early this year. So the 20th, 21st of January. And of course, it's taking 2 weeks for the vessels to come across from Asia into Los Angeles. So we're going to expect actually quite a slow February, March, April, because it looks like, Gene, most of the factories in China and Vietnam are going to take quite a long break this year. Typically, they take 2 weeks out. This year, we're looking at 4 to 5 weeks. So effectively, the factories will start to close down around about the 7th of January and probably going to run through till about the 6th of February. So we'll have quite a long rain shadow afterwards because it will take time to get that production back up and running. So we're already preparing for a very soft February in terms of sailings coming from Asia. So that will manifest itself, I think, for Los Angeles arrivals, a very soft February, March as well, while with the whole supply chain adjusts there. And then let's see, we'll probably see some pickup in seasonality around about March, April, May time. But everything we're talking about is always on a comparison with the year before. And of course, as we know, 2021 was off the charts in terms of volume. So it doesn't surprise me that at the moment we're seeing negative growth rates of between 15 and 20% compared with last year, because we must remember that last year was 15 to 20% up on the previous year, which was a normal year. So, it's not surprising that we're seeing some cooling off on a comparative basis.
No, I agree with you totally, and that's why we've paid attention very closely here at the Port of Los Angeles to our rolling 5-year average to take in all the fits and starts from trade policy here in the U.S., tariffs, retaliatory tariffs, and then the wild ride that we all took during COVID-19. And looking down line, we also see maybe some normality coming back into play Q2 and beyond. If we can flush out a lot of this inventory at the retail level here in the U.S. and push it through during these holiday season sales. So we're aligned. Good information, good intel from you, Jeremy, as always. Thank you. Philip, let's turn next to the media for some questions.
Very good. Thank you. First, a reminder to the media, some questions came in advance, but if you'd like to ask any, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and please remember to leave your name and affiliation. The first question is from Bill Mongaluzzo, the Journal of Commerce. It's directed at Jeremy. when do you expect spot rates to bottom out in the eastbound Trans-Pacific, and about what will that number be?
Yeah, so obviously, once supply and demand moves out of equilibrium, particularly on the short-term rating, we see quite a fall. So in the same way that when demand exceeds supply, spot rates go very quick because we can't get the supply side backing quick enough. Sure enough, over the last 6 to 8 weeks, demand has fallen faster than the supply side could be adjusted. So in the spot market, not the contract market, but the spot market, we have seen a significant drop down. And as you can see that across the various rate indexes which are published. But I would say in the last 2 to 3 weeks, we have seen a bottoming out now on those rates, on those rate indexes. And I would expect that to continue for a while into 2023. And then let's see whether demand starts to pull back and starts to push back up around April, May time. But I think we're effectively at the bottom now on those spot market rates.
Thank you, Jeremy. This next question comes in via the chat box from Sarah Zimmerman from Supply Chain Dive. It's directed at Gene. Can you give us a little bit more detail about your whistle stop tour? Who are you visiting? What key partners are you hoping to engage to bring cargo back to Los Angeles?
Thanks for joining again, Sarah. Talking to everybody. I've been in the East Coast, Midwest, running up and down the West Coast, talking to importers, exporters, retailers, manufacturers at the national and state level, all folks that have traditional cargo moving through this gateway, the automotive people in Detroit, as well as their tier 1 and tiered suppliers, making sure they understand the ground truth. We've got wide open capacity here in Los Angeles. The productivity numbers look very good as well. Our dock workers are on the job every day, pumping out the cargo that we do have in good order. All of the metrics that we've shared with the media during these past 2.5 to 3 years are looking good as well. Our dwell time on cargo that is meant to leave here by truck is back to pre-pandemic times. We're averaging about 3 days. The rail cargo has been flushed out. We're back to what looks like a normal rail loading scheme every single day with about 9,000 units on the ground in a snapshot of time. That aging cargo that was once just absolutely troublesome for all of us is now down to an extremely workable number by about 90% from its peak last holiday season. So the fluidity and looking at all these numbers supplied by the Port Optimizer and the data mining that people like Aveen Sharma and Damian Young do every day give us the perspective that we can share with that import and export community. And I know the Western railroads are eager to see this volume pop as well after all the work that we've done over the past months on the rail product. Again, what this industry really needed was information so we could see around corners and over hills before problems came about, and velocity. This port was meant to be a transit facility, not a warehouse. And if we can keep that cargo moving through the complex quickly, we can work the next ship better than anybody else can. So I appreciate it, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Next question is from Paul Avery of World Cargo News, and this is for Jeremy. Jeremy, what are you telling your customers about the risk of disruption until the West Coast labor contract is resolved?
Yeah, so we're telling our customers very similar to what Gene has just outlined. You know, Port of Los Angeles open for business. Our vessels are coming in. We're berthing on arrival most of the time. We're not having any delays. We're getting the ships around. The cargo is flowing. The intermodal is much, much better now on the rail side. So we're fluid again. And so that, is good. There shouldn't be any delays to any freight. Of course, we have the overhang continuing on the discussions between the ILW PMA. Those negotiations are going on. They're going to take a little bit longer than normal. But like Gene, I remain optimistic that both sides can find a logical and amicable outcome, which will create no disruption. And therefore, we're not expecting any disruption. And therefore, we would like to see, obviously, that last remaining question mark taken off the table. And then we can start to see, hopefully, more cargo coming back from this East Coast sort of ad hoc routing more back to the West Coast. And therefore, we can stabilize off our networks and really run our equipment flow more efficiently than we have been today, where we're just a little bit too East Coast biased than we need.
Very good. Jeremy, Greg Miller from FreightWaves is following up about a comment you made regarding a softer January, February. He's asking what percentage of your Asia West Coast sailings are currently being blanked, and where do you see that percentage going in the next couple of months?
Yeah, we're probably we'll be blanking. So ever since really the autumn holidays, that first week of October, things have been very soft. And we've been adjusting down, so we've been blanking about 20% of our sailings. And then over the Chinese New Year period, very typically across the industry, we drop down to, we only operate about 50% of our services. And then we'll just bring those back as the demand picks up. So we keep everything in alignment, and we don't cause, lots of ships moving around underutilized. And of course, we also have to think about the export, of course, coming out of North America as well, maintaining enough frequency there as well. So let's see. I mean, the market will decide ultimately in terms of demand. The customer, makes their comments very clear through their demand booking requirements. We'll meet that demand and we'll continue to operate that through. But we're also not just looking at the ship side. We're continuing to upgrade our customer service quality here in North America with O&E. We've brought in these new import dashboards now on our e-commerce website, so customers can get a complete indication of when their containers coming in, whether the arrival notice has been prepared, what's happening on the customs situation, is the intermodal ready to go, what are the payment situation, has the bill of lading been released. So we're providing a lot more data and dashboard, a lot more tracking information for our import customers into North America so they have more visibility going forward.
Greg has one quick follow question for you there, and that's regarding annual contracts. And with the decline in spot rates, do you see contracts being renegotiated in the months ahead?
Early days, of course. The new contracts don't kick in till the 1st of May. We've got another 2, 3, 4 months to go before then. So let's see how things progress. But I think generally one comment we've learned in this industry is, things go up, things come down. But when we get periods like this, where the cargo volume drops away, normally indicates that at some point down the line, cargo volumes will come back up again above the average median. So let's see how quickly the re-inventory program and the pickup in demand goes during February, March. But if we have a very long period of low cargo volume, generally means that will come later on in higher cargo volumes. So I think it's too early to call on what's going to happen on the Transpac rates for next year.
Very good, thank you. These next questions are from a few reporters, both for Gene and Jeremy, asking about China. How is the COVID-19 situation, China's response, and some of the social unrest that we saw a few weeks ago affecting global trade? Gene, can we start with you?
Sure, Philip. As I mentioned earlier, China's manufactured exports were down about 9% when November will be fully tallied. There's an impact there. But as we've been saying since the beginning of COVID-19, the central government and the ports in particular, especially Yangshan Deep Seaport and our friend Yang Jun, who runs that series of facilities, have prioritized our long-haul cargo here to Los Angeles. So we haven't seen these wild swings that some observers had called for throughout the past 2 years. Yet, there are problems on the ground, whether in your 4th or 5th wave of a COVID variant, the unfortunate social disruptions that we've seen in response to the strong zero COVID policies, or more recently, the loosening of those policies, which is now showing to see a spike in COVID cases. Every day there is something happening on the ground that's going to impact this supply chain, and it has been. We've got to be as resilient as possible. And while there are impacts on the subassembly, manufacturing, and transportation levels, we're seeing a pretty steady flow of cargo continuing to come from China.
Jeremy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the latest loosening up in the regulations is really, really welcome. That's in Hong Kong and across China now. So our staff, our offices, and of course, all of the actors within the supply chain now are much more open to be able to move around, less spot checks. The trucks are moving more efficiently now. So that's all really good news. I think the point, though, just to also be aware of for many of our big customers in North America is they are trying to decouple a little bit from their reliance on China as a strong sourcing point. So, we see typically 70–80% of cargo coming out of China. That is now we see some strategy around trying to, one-on-one, China will still be important, but looking at other locations. And I just did a trip through Vietnam a couple of weeks back, and that's really, really booming. India's really booming. Southeast Asia is going to boom. So there's a lot of, we've got to be able to adjust our loops and services so that we're not just covering the China main ports, which will continue to be strong and continue, but we have to cover these other markets where many of our North American retailers and importers are now going to increasingly source from over the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Jeremy, I think you kind of answered this next question from Michael Lev of Chainmail Newsletter with your in the last minute or two, but maybe there's something more you want to add. He's saying that there's so much talk of diversifying manufacturing out of China. What are you hearing about that? And do you anticipate seeing a meaningful shift? And are you preparing for a future that may look different?
Well, I think we've been preparing for that day really over the last 10 years, as we've seen the labor arbitrage, the cost of labor, gradually making Southeast Asia more and more cost effective against an increasing wage in China. But I think none of us should write off China. China will bounce back. China will get over this current setback it's had in terms of its production issues, and I think it'll come back strongly. But I think it can't expect to have such a large size of the pie. So yeah, we will see. We're seeing a lot of new investment coming in now into Indonesia, into India, into Vietnam and Malaysia. So that's going to continue to grow. But don't write China off. China will still be a very, very significant supplier of goods for many more years to come.
Thank you, Jeremy. Gene, these next couple questions are for you. They're from Dan Ronan of Transport Topics. You've touched a little bit on this today and in previous conferences, but what are the other factors besides labor talks that have impacted volume here in LA? And also about this shift to East Coast ports, do you see this as permanent or cyclical?
Yeah, thanks for joining, Dan. As always, good to hear from you. The biggest chunk is that change in allocation from East Coast to East and Gulf Coast away from here in Los Angeles by importers and exporters across the company. That's by far number one. Number two is that we had an earlier than normal peak season. Folks brought in their cargo. June and July were all-time bests for us. Third, the bulkier durables started to taper earlier this year, as we had shared in this setting. Refrigerators, furniture, some fixtures, as well as sporting goods, the big bulky items that usually take up a lot of containers. As an example, when many Americans were working from home, they may have bought a new couch, redid their kitchen or bathroom. In my case, I purchased those golf clubs, which still have not helped my game. But the point being, I'm not going to be buying those golf clubs every year. You're not going to buy a new refrigerator every year. So that began to taper. We've also been watching consumer demand, which has been super. August, September, October, and now the November numbers coming out all look very good. That's 70% of our economy. But there are factors, and when you're coming off this super sugar high that we witnessed over the last 12 to 18 months, volume was going to taper. We're going back out now into the service sector and spending more at restaurants, movies. Every airplane I've been on domestically has been just packed, turning away folks with vouchers. So there's a lot of movement in the economy. Some of this is pretty natural, but it's a big chunk of this cargo that importers and exporters just did not want to go back to their bosses for a third year in a row saying, I got caught in the teeth of congestion in Los Angeles. So they took a very conservative approach and in some cases maybe overcorrected and moved their allocations to those other ports. Again, this is part and parcel when folks get a little bit concerned about the overall atmosphere in the supply chain, one of which we're witnessing that protracted labor negotiation, even though both sides, the Pacific Maritime Association, the employers group, and the International Longshore and Warehouse Union have put out 2 jointly signed media releases saying they will not strike and they will not lock out the workforce. As you may recall me sharing, President Biden visited the Port of Los Angeles on June 10th, and to my knowledge, was the first sitting president to meet with both sides during an active negotiation, along with U.S. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, and implored both sides, stay at the table, keep working it. But collective bargaining is hard. Not only do these folks have to get a coastal framework put together on wage, benefit, health, safety, training, as well as the all-important work around robotics, technology, and automation, but they've got 29 ports ranging from the state of Washington down to San Diego. These ports have also local supplements that must be agreed upon in order to get to the bigger framework. It takes time, and it's very challenging work. So all of this has a play here. To your second point, doing nothing? Yes, absolutely. Cargo will stick at these other ports. Once the supply chain starts finding its way, if an importer is waiting for that cargo, the ship arrives every Friday, they get it in their warehouse in the Midwest every Friday a week from then, they're feeling pretty good. So we've got to go out there and earn that cargo. We've got to make sure that we have our ducks in a row on all the service parameters that are necessary. In the end, history has shown, whether it's protracted or a labor negotiation, cargo is going to keep finding its way to the easiest paths, and some of it will stay. That's reality. But I'm ultra competitive, and I'm going after every pound. We're coming.
Thank you. Jeremy, next question is for you from Stas Margaronis, the American Journal of Transportation. Is methanol a fuel likely to be used by more carriers in the future? And from an environmental standpoint, is it preferable to LNG?
Yeah, of course, very, very topical at the moment. We have the IMO meeting in London. We're trying to work out this industry green pathway for shipping. And we need to decarbonize. And the thing that we really need are these green fuels. So methanol per se today is not such a green fuel unless you make it with renewable energy. And that's the plan. So to create green methanol, we need to use renewable energy to create the methanol. And that's being developed. We're seeing good signs of progress on that front. And of course, methanol still has a carbon atom in it, but in terms of its carbon footprint or its carbon intensity, it's much, much better than obviously the fuel oils that we're using today on the ships. And actually, it's better than LNG as well, because LNG is still a carbon fuel. So we're looking to a number of options: ammonia, methanol in the future, and even maybe biogas for LNG. But we're still at very early days of development. We're working with the energy companies, and to answer the point, methanol, green methanol, could be a very, very good transitional fuel over the next 10 to 20 years. But to produce it takes a lot of renewable energy. So we have a lot of work to do there with the energy companies to get enough fuel.
Thank you. Next question is from Paul Berger from the Wall Street Journal. It's for both Gene and Jeremy. Import volumes are falling at ports across the country. What do recent figures tell you about the state of the global economy? Gene, why don't we start with you?
Well, there's a lot here as always, Paul, and good to have you with us again this month as well. The consumer continues to spend almost unabated. As I mentioned, from August through now, the consumer spend numbers look good. Early tracking from Black Friday showed good sales numbers, high foot traffic, Cyber Monday, good click traffic. And the National Retail Federation has said their forecast for the holiday season, November, December combined, shows to be at about 6 to 8% growth over last year's all-time record here in the United States. 70% of GDP is us spending. That bodes very well. But what it has, when you pull apart the components, is a need to flush out a lot of this inventory that's been sitting for some time. Retailers have been talking since the summer about discounted pricing to get that inventory churn so we can have a reset in 2023 and better align timing, goods with the consumer's needs. So all of that remains there. The interest rate hike today at 50 basis points was a relief to some. The inflation rate slowed at the report earlier, down to 7.1%, a little bit lower than some of the experts had predicted. And just out this morning, Producer wholesale prices dropped just a little bit as well. So while on the leading indicator sign of this great shipping industry, we're starting to see that slowing, it's combined with an inventory release here in the United States and an active consumer with its retail partners trying to get as many goods in their hands as possible. So there's a lot here. Also, looking down line, so much concern and hand-wringing about recession. Been talking to a lot of folks in the economic world, especially in equities and investment, and they're telling me the same thing. With this consumer power that remains, and 11 million jobs nearly open nationwide, lowest unemployment since the 1960s, there's a lot of disconnects in this economic equation that don't look traditional from what we've seen in economic models over the last 40 years. I still like our chances. It may be muted growth as we go into Q1, but the early estimates on Q4 this year could be between 2.5% and 3% growth. Remember, Q3 was recently adjusted upward to 2.9% growth. Pretty solid for the back half of the year when it comes to the U.S. economy. Yet, we're not going to count too much going forward. We're going quarter by quarter, building block by building block in what we add to this U.S. economy. Thanks, Paul.
Jeremy, would you like to add to that?
I would just say at the global level, we're seeing on October 2022 versus October 2021, we're seeing at the global level about an 8 or 9% decrease. So North America is higher, but of course, in North America, we're working off a much higher comparison year in 2021. So the cargo volumes were much, much higher in 2021 than they were in the rest of the world. I'm kind of more in Gene's camp here. I think that traditionally the US market, we see a quick correction. We tend to go into these things earlier and we tend to come out of them quicker than a lot of our other container shipping markets. So overall, we know it's going to be a slow first half on cargo volumes, but we expect at some point there will be a rebalancing. And when that comes, probably towards the second half of 2023, it's going to be back to business as usual, I think.
Very good. Jeremy, this is from Eric Watkins at Cargomatic. At last year's TPM conference, you suggested a 24/7 work schedule would improve productivity at U.S. ports. Do you still think that's a good idea? And are shipping lines and terminals willing to pay for those additional hours?
Yes, I do think it's a good idea. 24/7 is how we're operating in Asia and in Europe. And if we can bring North America on to 24/7, then we can balance off and make sure that all the schedules on the ships can move around on a 24/7 basis. So I think that would be a positive development. But to do that, of course, we need to put in the investment into the terminals. And we need to, of course, be able to work with our stevedores and our port workers community as well to make them feel comfortable and safe to work in that type of environment as well. But I do believe that would be a big step forward. Of course, our customers on the supply chain on the import side would also have to think about some recalibration also in the way that they are then receiving into the DCs. But why not? 24/7 would be a much more efficient way. It would also be much better for the environment as well. Instead of having these big speed bumps, we could just flow on a more even basis. That allows us to move the assets around more efficiently and therefore less dwell and therefore less catch up later. So it would also be good for the environment.
Gene, any 24/7 thoughts?
Sure, we stand ready, but to Jeremy's point, we got to get the calendars aligned of all these supply chain players. Without that, it goes nowhere.
Very good. This question is really for both of you. It's regarding Lunar New Year, which Jeremy spoke about briefly. Comes early this year, starting, I think it's January 22nd. How will this affect Trans-Pacific trade as we start 2023? Jeremy, would you like to start?
Yeah, so as indicated earlier on, we will see the factories starting to close down around about the 6th of January. They will have enough inventory that they will have already produced to be able to ship that out right up to Chinese New Year. But after about the 23rd, 24th of January, we'll see a big drop off in shipments. And therefore, if you translate that forward 2 weeks' time, that second week of February is going to where you're going to see a big drop off in terms of cargo volumes. That's probably going to be a 5-6 week drop off. And then we'll start to see things come back sometime, during April, May.
Very good. So Paul Avery from World Cargo News is following. You mentioned briefly, Jeremy, some terminal upgrades here in Los Angeles at YTI. Anything else on that? He's basically saying is how much new capacity are you looking to add? Any plans that you can share?
Yeah. So we'll continue to work away with our management teams there and our other shareholders. But essentially, YTI had a major refit and upgrade only a couple of years ago with the support of the Port of Los Angeles. And our Trapac facility, we have an automated yard, we have a manual landside operation, key crane operation, and we have another berth there, which is currently very manual. So we'll work over the next 2-3 years working with our partners to look at upgrading those facilities and providing better productivity and more capacity in the future.
Very good. This final question comes to us from Eric He at City News Service. It's directed at Gene. What is the biggest lesson that you learned coming out of 2022?
Well, thanks for being with us again, Eric, and as always, sharing your thoughts. I think the biggest thing we learned is that everything is important. The decisions we make here at the Port of Los Angeles affect someone. And that was really amplified in 2022. We have 3 core areas that we work on every day: the business of the port, of which we have 8 lines of business, the community that we work with. There are 250,000 residents that live in this harbor enclave, from Watts to Wilmington, Harbor City, Harbor Gateway, and right here in San Pedro where I'm at. The environment and our road to zero emissions. We've been doing this for a long time. We've got this outsized leadership responsibility that's been developed here since the Clean Air Action Plan went into place back in 2006. We upped our ante on that back in 2017, and we're going zero emissions by 2030 on cargo handling equipment, 2035 on heavy-duty trucks. But we've got to expedite, we've got to accelerate that technology because it's nowhere near ready yet for this heavy-duty industrial environment. And the last one, which really underpins everything we're doing, we've been leaders in the data space now, whether it's the Port Optimizer or all the things that we've been doing in collaborative effect with our partners. We've got to be able to protect that data. And whether it's the Cybersecurity Operations Center that right now is stopping 40 million cyber intrusion attempts a month here at the Port of Los Angeles, which is double what it was before COVID-19, to the newly opened Cyber Resilience Center, which now brings in our private sector partners, more than 24. And it's meant to be an early warning system. If one of our partners sees an intrusion attempt, they share that information with the port and our co-creator, IBM, synthesize it and push it back out to all the members so they can be prepared. All of this is done under a cloak of anonymity because we don't want to hurt anyone's brand or standing in the market. So that's kind of what we're coming after right now. While we try to take care of everything, so much impacts us, whether it's the economy, geopolitical issues, social issues, and how we respond right here on the ground. As an example, with those 109 ships that were at anchor and how quickly we moved to make sure that they were offshore, farther away from our neighborhoods, lessening the pollution impacts, we saw the downward turn in emissions right away, and we'll see a more normal glide path downwards when we release our 2022 emissions inventory at the beginning of next year. So it's a big responsibility, and there's a lot of folks that have a say around this port being at the confluence of all these activities. That was my biggest takeaway from this year and how much we have to do going forward. Thanks, Eric. Good to hear from you.
That concludes today's questions. Gene, back to you for closing thoughts.
Jeremy, thanks again so much for your insights today. Wishing everyone at the O&E and you happy holidays for a prosperous 2023.
Thank you very much, Gene, and super to be on the call today. And let's all stay very, very focused and try to make 2023 as smooth and efficient as possible here on the West Coast. Thank you.
Will do. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, today marks the last media briefing of 2022 here at the Port of Los Angeles. I have to say, it feels like a lifetime ago that I was here with you sharing my expectations for the upcoming year, and it's gone by in a blink of an eye. Yet, what an eventful year it's been. We started in January with those 109 ships waiting for berths. All of our terminals were filled, but our supply chain partners and our great labor force did an outstanding job clearing the cargo. So much so that by August, even with record volume, 90% of the backlog had been eliminated. In fact, we hit new productivity levels on our docks this year, averaging an exchange of 12,000 TEUs per ship call. That's cargo loaded on and unloaded from every vessel that comes in, and that beats our previous record set just last year. We also broke cargo records 5 out of the first 7 months this year. It wasn't until late summer that we began to see the decline that continues today. Yet here we are, headed to the second best year ever in our 115-year history. And there were many other highlights. We welcomed President Biden during his historic visit in June. We secured high-profile, multi-million-dollar grants that will accelerate our push on physical and digital infrastructure. And now, we're preparing to build the nation's first port campus to train and reskill our workforce. As we look to 2023, we're laser focused on recapturing cargo, expanding our data efforts, and building infrastructure, all while continuing to create more jobs and lead our industry to a zero-emission future. I'll be discussing all of this and more at our annual State of the Port address on January 19th. Please mark the date, and I hope to see many of you there in person. In the meantime, my personal best wishes to all of you for a joyous and happy holiday season. Take care, everyone.